The war in Ukraine overshadows everything, and with each day the world becomes more unstable. Today we take a look at Europe, where the fallout of the Ukraine war can be felt the most. In this report, I will tell you why this winter is just the start of Europe's downfall, and why the next years could very likely see the collapse of the old continent. There are so many problems that the continent has to face that it's 100% impossible to handle the coming crises. Let's break them down and welcome to Dark New World. For many years, people in Europe thought that they're finished with history, that wars and suffering were a thing from the past and would never return. How foolish. First the pandemic, and now the war in Ukraine is showing us that history is not finished with Europe. Let's start with a fragile economic situation, which will be the trigger for everything else that will go sideways in Europe. The pandemic was one of the triggers of economic uncertainty and vulnerability, putting stress on public finance and leading to massive policy changes. The situation was further aggravated by the war in Ukraine, which generated immense human suffering on the ground, but also added to economic woes. At the end of August, the annual inflation rate in the euro area was estimated to be 9.1%. Rise in energy prices, a component of the overall inflation calculation, was over 38%. This high inflation is expected to come with stagnation in the economy, which had been on the rebound after the pandemic. Incomes have not kept up with inflation, which will continue to erode purchasing power in Europe. But we all know that the energy crisis turned into an energy catastrophe with the terror attacks on Nord Stream 1 and 2. We entered a phase in which critical infrastructure is a viable target. The transition from natural gas to renewable energies is important, but it's a process that requires time. Now, the continent needs to find alternative sources in record time. And this won't end well. Europe faces a recession, and paired with a polarization linked to the war in Ukraine, we will see rising tensions in the near future. In October 2022, we already see protests in France, long lines at gas stations after strikes in the petroleum industry. The question is, how long will Europeans tolerate to suffer economically until the support for Ukraine wanes? Extremist parties on both sides will use the situation for their advantage. Financial crises are followed by important changes in voter behavior that in turn contribute to high levels of policy uncertainty. Political polarization increases after financial crises throughout the 19th and 20th century. Moreover, political parties on the far right appear to be the biggest political beneficiaries of a financial crash. On average, far-right parties have seen an increase in their vote shares of about 30% relative to their pre-crisis level in the 5 years following a systemic financial crisis. For Europe, this could mean more division and as a consequence, more chaos. The economic situation and the political shift in itself are gigantic crises that are hard enough to handle on their own. But let's not forget that the continent is at war with Russia. At this point, not a kinetic war, but an economic one for certain. But enough with economics. This isn't a financial crisis only. We are talking about blackouts in Europe. Let's talk about energy and potential social unrest. Europe is one of the richest continents on Earth. The old world has, compared to its neighbors, Asia and Africa, an incredible standard of living. For the first time in 80 years, people in Europe are faced with significant decline of their standard of living. Governments in Europe scramble to try to mitigate the effects on the economic and energy sector. Europe's economic powerhouse, Germany, will get hit especially hard. The country produces a lot of things, and with rising energy costs, companies will have to increase prices of products. And if a fiat gas shortage will occur this winter, or more likely next winter, factories have to decrease output or shut down completely. This could be the final nail in the coffin for the economy in Europe. The situation in itself is bad enough, but now the backbone of the economy is struggling with the potential of collapse. I say that this winter is just the beginning, a preview so to speak. Because this summer, Germany still had limited supply from Nord Stream 1 to fill the gas reserves. But next year, the supply from Nord Stream is missing. And we have yet to see how Germany will be able to fill their reserve tanks for the winter in 2023. LNG terminals will be constructed in record time, and alternative sources are already found. Not to the same price, of course. But to get the needed resources to the desired location is another problem in itself. The attacks on the pipelines prove that infrastructure is a viable target. Nobody can guarantee the safety of the remaining pipelines anymore. Although governments increase security measures, the armies of the world cannot guard thousands upon thousands of kilometers of pipeline at the same time. Imagine there is an act of sabotage of one of the alternative energy supply routes to Europe. Germany won't be able to fill up reserves in time for the next winter. Remember, policymakers in Berlin still fear blackouts with the almost full tanks. And the only reason the reserves are filled this year was Nord Stream 1. But even without this nightmare scenario, people in Europe will start to struggle financially. What follows is a wave of protests. These protests will be united at first, before political parties will try to gain influence within the movements. The end result will be a heated political landscape, one in which populism and extreme viewpoints will infect populations across Europe. Prices will rise, food will be expensive, and the people want to have someone to blame the situation. This could be the opposing political party, a group of people, like a minority, or the parties involved in the Ukraine conflict. The internal debates will evolve into power struggles, and protests will be met by counter-protests. And then we have the potential of chaos in the streets. Most people in Europe have a lot to lose. The potential of irrational behavior is heightened when people are faced with a decline in their standard of living. So the reactions could be certainly more extreme than people expect. At the moment, most Europeans still accept the burden that comes with the situation. But we don't see any signs of an improvement, and with time, this will change. And even on a transnational scale, viewpoints could change and destabilize the EU. One example is Hungary. Citing the state of emergency caused by the Ukraine war, Orban signed off a special legal order in May, which allowed the government to suspend certain acts of parliament and rule by decree. Hungarian officials have said the law is necessary to speed up decision-making and protect peace and security amid an unprecedented crisis sparked by the war. Under Orban, Hungary has pursued a policy of what it calls strict neutrality towards Ukraine, which some pundits have said is pro-Russian. Though the Hungarian leader called for a ceasefire in Ukraine, he has also refused to allow weapon transfers across the Hungary-Ukraine border, mocked Volodymyr Zelensky, and lobbied against EU sanctions on Russia. The Europeans have to realize that they cannot stay silent in a fast-changing world. The biggest overwhelming need is that Europeans will have to react to the harsh winds of political globalization in the future. Political globalization is more than just the economic globalization that has been talked about endlessly in the last decade. It is a quest for political order on a planet that has outgrown its merely regional structure. It will drag the Europeans out of their cozy, US-subsidized corner of comfort, in which liberal order, pluralism, political stability, and the absence of major conflict were somehow taken for granted. Europeans have a lot to lose in political globalization, because their lifestyles are so hard to maintain and defend. Others want to partake in it because they crave it, yet others want to destroy it because they hate it. And fundamentally, it relies on a global order that the Europeans are unable to guarantee. And this global order is about to collapse. The current crises are global and interlinked. They are the consequence of unsustainable systems of production and consumption in a globalized economy. More than 6.5 million have lost their lives to COVID-19 so far. Extreme heat hit the Indian subcontinent this summer. 1/3 of Pakistan is flooded. Extreme global temperatures triggered rapid melting of Himalayan glaciers, and the resulting floods displaced 32 million Pakistanis, who are in urgent need of shelter, food and medicine. The scale of the devastation seen in Pakistan, or the severity of the typhoon in South Korea, or the ongoing wildfires and drought in California exceeded projections. For example, the impacts of the floods in Pakistan will be felt across the globe. Pakistan is a major producer and consumer of rice, one of the main staples in the global food market, which is already under strain because of the war in Ukraine. Food prices and markets are volatile, facing potential disruptions in supply chains. Droughts in Europe are likely to further affect prices, exacerbating the cost of living crisis there. This picture of multiple simultaneous crises is a complex and challenging one we have not seen before. As in all crises, some countries and communities will be affected more than others. Many households in Europe and across the planet are worried about their ability to meet basic needs like food and heating. Our natural systems, health and economy are also vulnerable. Most global crises point to a single root cause: the unsustainable use of our planet's resources. And while Europeans thought it will happen in the third world only, and that they will be spared from all the consequences, they now realize in horror that they might be the next domino that will fall. But that's not even the worst case scenario. What if the conflict in Ukraine goes nuclear? In this video, we talk about the use of tactical nuclear weapons. And on the right, you can find out how the next decade will be defined by regional wars and conflicts. My name is Dennis, thank you for watching and goodbye.